You'd be surprised how many times I've driven along this main road between Northampton and Bedford. What I didn't realise was just how big this village is. As you'll hear by the traffic, lots and lots of traffic.
You're on MGM films, 20th Century Fox films. What's that big house over there?
Turvey House.
Oh, Turvey House, is it? Oh, right. And who lives there, do you know?
I think it's the Queen's cousin who lives there.
Oh.
Queen's cousin.
Well, whether it was the Queen's cousin or not, I'm not sure, but I have got a little bit of information about the house later on, because we have another look at it. Beautiful scenes from this bridge overlooking the River Ouse, and I spent nearly 3 hours in Turvey. Pretty patterns on the water, and we have a look around here and move to the old mill, and then we'll walk around Turvey and I'll tell you a little bit about one or two of the buildings, and then we will move back down and walk along the river banks. These are two characters that were put here hundreds of years ago. At one time they were on a lower level and got flooded, because they get a lot of flooding round here. There's all flood meadows at the side of the river. But I don't know, during the period of time these people or characters were moved to higher land, so they didn't get swamped and drowned with all the floods. Marvellous how someone has the idea of just putting them there. Well, this is the old flour mill, and it was rebuilt actually in 1885 after a terrible fire which ruined the earlier mill. It's now been converted into flats, and at one time, before the flats, Cristo crisps were produced here. Next to the mill is a house called the Sandpiper. Well, there's one thing I discovered, and even by talking to one of the locals who had lived there 40 years. There's two houses, one here and one farther up the main high street, that says it's the old bakehouse. The Three Fishes public house, which was built in 1622, was closed overnight by, I think it was the Green King brewery, this lady said. It was closed overnight, much to the dismay of all the villagers, and there was a big petition put up, but of course it was too late, and it's a listed building and it's now up for sale. This row of cottages were built about 200 years ago, and each cottage cost about £150 to build. And here's one of the old standpipes. There's another one of these up the Carlton Road, as I discovered later on my walk. Well, this well, which is now all covered in, just the hole and the arched wall is there, but it's been giving, or was giving, water from the year 1600. It was closed up in 1960 and was featured at that time, because of all the protests in the village, it was featured on television in September 1960. And once upon a time, all the men and women and children that were old enough that lived in Turvey were employed in lace making. Well, now I think they can be employed in fruit picking. Look at all those wild damsons or plums, much the same thing. And just at another bush, about 5 yards down the road, you could certainly go blackberry picking here. Well, you can see the church in the background. That's looking right across the village green. We're going up to the far end, the Bedford end of the main street, and then coming back down, and I'll take you for a look round the church. Across the road, a short way away, we shall get another look at this building. It's the old rectory. Now there's two school buildings here in Turvey. The one showing here, which is the oldest one, dates to 1792. Believe it or not, when it first opened, the headmaster was paid £20 per year for his services. My, how things have changed. Apparently, according to the roof of that square building, it was once thatched. The village stores, which this building houses, was once the Tinker of Turvey Public House, and the building dates back to 1150. And many years ago, Stagecoaches changed their horses here. Well, there you are. There's another old bakehouse. And this is where I stood and talked to a lady until her lift came along. Apparently she was going into Bedford. Another lady I talked to, I don't know, she would be about 20, 25, had got a child with her, a couple of years old, and she stopped and was going in her cottage, and we had a few words. And she went in and got the Ordnance Survey map, because apparently the railway line that closed in the 50s and 1950s, 60s ran past Turvey, and there was apparently a station at Turvey, which is something I didn't know. So she went, and that's the old chapel there. She went and got the Ordnance Survey map, and that showed the track bed of the old railway. But it was a little bit too far to walk, and had I not have spent so long in the village, I would have walked up and see if I could find signs of the old railway station, which would have been very interesting. In one of my other walks, using my still camera, there was a house called Box Cottage. Well, it's down this little area that the young lady lived. Beautiful little cul-de-sac, I suppose you'd call it, a little dead-end road. But there is a track goes off at the end, and she said that that runs down to the site of the old railway line. She's just going in there, I think, to get the map. So very nice. You know, you wander around these villages and everyone is so helpful and friendly. You walk round a town and nobody opens their mouth, says good morning, good evening, good night or anything. Totally different life, I think, in a village, although I've never actually lived in a village. Okay, I don't understand what this says, do you? But this is over the doorway to the side entrance of the rectory, and this was built in 1839, and when you look at it, just imagine it cost £1,000. Some beautiful architecture on it, the way all those bricks are laid in, the purgatory on the top gable there, and an owl sitting in a little recess. And you saw the chimney stacks earlier. Just an amazing building, really. There you are, built for £1,000. Another view coming up in a moment from just around the corner. Well, we're now walking up Carlton Road. That's the road leading to another village called Carlton, which I haven't yet walked round, but the one adjoining it, called Harold and Harold Country Park, I have walked all around. Here's an old pump. Well, to get to the old chapel, I realised that this is a private path going up here, but I did venture up, and this is what I found at the end of it. Those ornaments, and to the right of me, there you go, the doors of the old chapel, but that's just about all you could see. But I managed to get another couple of shots by walking along someone else's footpath. Isn't it lovely and quiet and peaceful? Well, it was until that car came along. There's another standpipe. If we get short of water, they will be in use. Well, that is the one and only pub in Turvey. Care for a drink? Apparently they do excellent Sunday lunches. And right next door to it, yet again, is the church. Everywhere there's a church, there's a pub across the road. This is a Lychgate or Lichgate, L-Y-C-H. You tell me how to pronounce it, because I don't know. I think it's a Lychgate, but it might be Lich. So Lich or Lich, let's have a closer look. Well, I suppose you could see that they were working on the roof. There was 3 or 4 workmen there, and as I entered this church, I could hear ghostly voices. Rather worrying. But then I realised it was the radio that the workmen were using up on the roof outside. Some unusual stained glass in this church, which incidentally is 13th century. And these tombs are dated 1571. In the tower there are 8 bells, which are pealed on Sundays and for weddings. The oldest of the 8 bells dates back to 1815 and weighs 19 hundredweight. Some of the plaques you find when you're walking around these villages are quite interesting. Of course, this one, as you can see, concerns the organ, and the beautifully decorated pipes of the organ are a wonderful sight to behold. The actual organ keyboard, of course, was locked up, so I didn't or wasn't able to see that. Beautiful works of art, aren't they? So intricate. And the lovely choir stalls with their carved bench ends. And that weather vane, which is the other side of the pub to the church, is an old chapel. The weather vane sits on the top of an old chapel. Back to the Three Fishes pub now, and the river bridge, and all the lovely shapes and patterns of this rushing water. And the lone fisherman sitting there, and we're looking, or we've got in our sights once again, Turvey House, and this was built in 1794 by John Higgins of Turvey, and he and his family and his descendants lived in it until the early 1900s, when it was sold to a different family. Well, I'm in the meadows now, the flood meadows of Turvey, which will look nothing like this when winter comes. I hope you've enjoyed this walk around Turvey with me, and you'll come again soon. Bye bye.